Hello, and thank you for joining in today's cooking segment during the American Kidney Fund's Kidney Action Week. Kidney Action Week is our initiative to provide education on kidney disease prevention and management. We would like to thank U.S. Renal for sponsoring this event. My name is Carolyn, and I am a kidney transplant dietitian. I'm super excited to be here. I've been volunteering with the American Kidney Fund for many years, and I'm just really excited about this virtual Kidney Action Week. Today we're going to be making arepas. They are a dish from Colombia and Venezuela in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. All right, so let's get going. All right, so I put my hair back, I washed my hands, and now we're ready to get into it. I'm gonna show you my cutting board and all of the different ingredients that we're gonna be working with, and then we're just gonna get right to it. All right, let's do it. I like to gather all of my ingredients before I start cooking to make sure that I have everything. So then I gather everything and then I read over the recipe one more time. So this is to make some arepas, which is a Colombian or Venezuelan style corn fritter. It calls for 2 ears of corn, 2 scallions or green onions, a jalapeno, some coarsely ground cornmeal, some flour, a tiny bit of sugar, baking soda, salt, unsalted butter, whole milk, some canola oil for frying, like pan frying, shallow frying, and then some cilantro for garnish. You can also garnish with some creme fraiche or sour cream as well. Okay, so this recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of butter. The great thing about when you are working with butter is the packaging has all of the measurements out. So you can just use that as a guide to cut off the 1-2 tablespoons. I actually have some open butter, so I'm gonna use that instead. And here you can see that I used it from the wrong end, so that's great because I'm just gonna cut now the 1-2 tablespoons. And the way that you're able to guide yourself for that is you can kind of see the lines here. And then you just take your knife at the top of that 2 tablespoon line and cut in. It's nice to have softened butter when you need to work with it. And that's because it's gonna take a lot less time for it to melt. It asks us to melt it on the stove. So I'm gonna get a saucepan and pop it on the stove while I do the rest of this, so that way my butter will be ready and waiting for me. So the first part of the instructions, well actually let's talk about some corn. So shucking corn is not very hard. You just pull this back and it's really great because then you have this nice handle to use it and hold with it. So that's awesome. And then that way your hand isn't getting up close to the blade or anything like that. You can boil this first, or you can just use it raw off the cob. I'm from Missouri, so I'm used to just plain old raw corn on the cob. It's so delicious, it's so fresh. And then all you do with your fingers away from the blade, your hand safely, and you can just cut this right straight down. And look how those cobs just come right off. You can also use really well, like frozen corn. If it's not corn season, you'll see that this doesn't take any time whatsoever. So if it's corn season, if it's summer, bam, use a fresh ear of corn. But if it's not, that's okay. Use some frozen corn. Make sure that it's really well thawed so that way your mixture isn't too wet. Look at all this delicious corn flavor I'm getting, all these little corn kernels, and you do it into a bowl so that way they don't flip all around. And see how my hand is not even anywhere near? It's because I'm using the husk of this corn as a handle. And this recipe calls for 2 ears of corn. So that one's done. Put that away. Get out the next one. You know what? I'm going to measure this for you with a measuring cup so you can see how much volume this is. So that way you don't have to guess if you're trying to do this recipe in the winter or maybe early spring when there is no fresh corn available. So that way you'll know what 2 ears of corn really is, like how much volume that is. It looks, I'm gonna guess that it's 2 cups, but I don't know. All right, scrape off my knife. And then let's get a 2-cup measuring cup, just so that way I can see how much it is. I've got a spoon here, a large serving spoon. And honestly, I'm just going to dump this right on in, kind of guide this. You know, I don't want to lose any of these kernels after I worked so hard to put it in a bowl. So that way they didn't fall on the floor or, you know, escape in any way. I know there are some other tricks like popping the corn in the microwave to husk it and things like that. Honestly, the little stringy bits don't bother me, the little corn silk. It's not a big deal to me. But again, like I said, you know, being from Missouri, there was a lot of fresh corn. I had some friends whose parents, like college friends whose parents were farmers, so, you know, that doesn't bother me. But yeah, it's a little bit over 2 cups. Well, you can't really see, but it's a little bit over 2 cups. I'm just going to dump this back in. That was just, certainly you don't need to do that, but if you were going to use frozen corn, I wouldn't recommend using canned corn, but if you were going to use frozen corn, you would use about 2 cups, maybe a little bit over 2 cups for this recipe. And then it tells you to add the scallions or green onions, the jalapeno, and the rest of the dry ingredients to this bowl. So we're gonna move this bowl out of our way right now while we prep the rest of these ingredients. So these scallions or green onions have been washed. It's really important to have some basic knife skills so that way you don't run the risk of cutting yourself. So first off, if you are using your knife down here at the base, you don't have very good control. So the closer to the blade, not on the blade, but the closer to the blade you can get, just right here at the nape of it, the neck, that's a great place to hold. And then you can use the rest of your fingers, bam. And then now you're free to chop and cut and do whatever. And these fingers aren't in the way of the knife. Next part is your hand, other hand, you want to make sure you tuck your fingers in to do your chopping. That way you don't run the risk of chopping off any of these guys, right? So we are going to slice our scallions. Now, if you want, you can cut them on a bias, and that just means to cut them slantways, right? And then they might look nice and pretty if they were going to have like a presentation or something like that. The green parts are also edible, but the tips you don't really want. I always start at the tip part and work my way down to the onion part. I'm going to cut the very beginning parts of the tips on that bias that I was talking about, just because it looks nice for presentation and it's a good way to, it's a nice garnish. So what you do is you just kind of have your knife at an angle. Remember, tuck those fingers in. And then you don't ever really want to take your knife off the cutting board, because that makes you have less control too. And you just want to do it in a nice little motion. See how these are nice and angled? They're kind of in a, you know, a diamond pattern, which this will be nice for garnish. So we're gonna get a little bowl and put these right in here for garnish, all right? And then the rest we can just chop normally. doesn't tell me just to do the whites of the onion. It doesn't tell me just to do the greens of the onion. So I'm going to do the whole onion. I really like onion. If you don't like onion, don't do the white part. That's where all the onion flavor is going to be coming, or the majority of that onion flavor is going to come from. And your hands are just pushing this along. You know, I go slower when I get closer to my fingers because I'm not a professional chef. I am pretty much a self-taught home chef. And I guess I wouldn't call myself a chef then. I would call myself a cook. I'm a home cook. A pretty proficient home cook. Oh, I hear my butter crackling away. So I'm going to turn my butter off. I'm going to show you what it looks like. So I just melted it, and there it is. I melted it on low. There's 2 tablespoons of butter, and now I'm just going to let it cool, but it's not going to cool all the way down to solid again. It's just going to sit over there waiting for me when I need it. I have a pretty small kitchen, so it makes it easy for me just to move around. Also, let's wipe my board a little bit so I can have some room. Maybe you don't like this much onion, so, you know, just because it calls for 2 scallions or green onions doesn't mean you have to use them. I also think that this might be, I don't know, a little bit big. What if I chomped into this, right? So I'm going to dice this as well. Just kind of real rough, like I do a rough chop. So with that, again, you're holding it in the base, and then you place the base of your other hand on the tip, and then you just kind of rock it back and forth. I don't know if onions ever make you cry. Onions always make me cry, and these little bad boys, even though they're just green onions, I'm starting to kind of tear up. But see just how a few quick little rough chops, and now instead of it being these big circles, now they're more bite-sized, easy to use pieces. I'm going to get my bowl, which I didn't move too far away, and then scrape these in to the bowl. And voila. All right. Oh, I should have done those last because they are pretty strong. Next, jalapeno. Jalapenos can be hot. They might not be as hot. Let's say you don't like spice. Then what you want to do is you want to cut out all of the seeds. An easy way to cut out all the seeds, cut it in half. Because like when I'm doing it like this knife is too big of a knife for this project. You really want to use the right size knife. If I was to do this, I could easily slip and cut myself. But using the right knife makes it much, much easier. And, you know, there, it fits right in, and bam. The seeds and the lining is out. That's where all of the peppers are holding their heat, or that capsaicin, which is the hot part of the pepper. I'm gonna trim it a little bit more. I'm gonna leave the seeds on one side because I do kind of like spicy. I don't like it too spicy. I like it medium spicy. I don't ever want to have a ghost pepper or a jalapeno pepper or anything like that. Well, I might actually cut this out. But I'm not gonna be as, there we go. And now you just, same thing, same technique. The blade of the knife never leaves. See, if I was really particular about my spice, I would have cleaned all of those seeds off the cutting board, but I'm okay with that. Let's say you're dealing with really hot peppers, like a habanero or a ghost pepper, you would want to be wearing rubber gloves. Jalapenos are not that hot, so you don't need to. And again, I'm going to dice this because I don't want to bite into a big circular half moon and then maybe wreck my my corn fritter, right? But just a few little quick chops. Run your fingers over. This is why you wash your hands, right? Beforehand, because what you want to do is make sure everything is clean. Now I'm going to put this in to my bowl, and here we go. The reason I got everything onto my cutting board first was because I was getting my mise en place, or I'm putting everything in its place, so that way it makes my assembly much easier. This would take me a lot longer if I was walking back and forth and having to wash these different ingredients and do all this stuff. Like, here we go. All of my dry ingredients are right here, which makes it so much easier for me to do this, right? So now I'm just gonna continue to assemble the dry ingredient bowl. It calls for 1/3 cup of coarsely ground cornmeal. So I'm going to get my 1/3 cup and do my cornmeal. Cornmeal, you can use it to make polenta. You can use it to make tamales. You can use it to make grits. There's different types. There's fine, there's coarse. There's all different. So I'm not being very scientific with this. If you were baking like a cake or a pie or like pie crust, you would need to be, or bread, you would need to be really scientific with this and measure exactly. But this is not like a baking thing. So I'm just gonna take this, sprinkle it all over. Then it tells me to add the cornmeal, the flour, which it asks for a 1/2 cup of flour. Oh, you can't really see that, but here we go. A 1/2 cup of flour. Now I am gonna take and make this a little bit more on the exact side, right? So you just kind of brush it down, bring it back and forth to fill in any of those little gaping holes. Voila. And there you go. There's a 1/2 cup of flour. And again, I'm just gonna kind of shake it in. Just makes it easier to mix, right? Instead of just dumping it all in one space. After my 1/2 cup of flour, it calls for the sugar, which is a teaspoon of sugar. I'll take my teaspoon of sugar. That's not a teaspoon of sugar. Voila, a teaspoon of sugar. Sprinkle that in. 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. I actually just kind of have this, you know, it's called a salt pig. I don't know why, but bam, salt. And then it calls for a 1/2 teaspoon. It's nice just to have all your teaspoons connected, because then you don't have to dig around and find them. A 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, or not baking powder, I'm sorry. 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. I bet you anything they chose baking soda because baking soda does not have added phosphorus, whereas baking powder does. So into the bowl. And now I'm gonna read my recipe to make sure that I've got everything in here. So it says, slice off the corn into the bowl, add the scallions, we did, add the jalapeno, check, cornmeal, check, flour, check, sugar, check, salt, check, baking soda, check, into the bowl. Okay. This bowl right now is finished. We're gonna mix our wet ingredients next. It tells us to add 1 egg, which I've already separated into a bowl, or cracked into a separate bowl, so that way to make sure I didn't get any shells in my bowl. It also tells us to go ahead and add the milk. And the melted butter, which I had also put into a separate little bowl. I just do this to make it easier for me. You don't have to. You can do it right over, but this way I know that I have all the right amounts and I'm not gonna have to restart because I accidentally dropped something into my bowl. And now it just tells us to whisk it together. You can use this type of whisk. This is the kind that I have. There's also those balloon whisks that you can use. There's a flat whisk, but it just tells us to whisk this together. And then, after it's all whisked together, it should be in a uniform color. You don't want to add the butter when it's really too hot because then you could end up curdling or cooking the eggs. So I let that butter set while we were mixing everything, all the dry ingredients together, and it cooled down enough that it wasn't going to, mix into my eggs. And now this is not the appropriate mixing tool, but you see how the egg is hanging. That's just the whites of the egg. So maybe I'm going to mix a little bit more. Hopefully it'll get some of that off. And then it just tells us to mix this really well. So I'm going to pour this in. I'm going to pour this in. I've got my spoon. Scrape down the sides. I'm going to put this in my sink because, again, raw egg. Eggs like chicken can have salmonella, so that's why you never want to eat a raw egg. And then you're just going to mix this all in. This looks really great. Scraping the side. You could probably even do this with a spatula, really. Not even need to use a spoon, so then you could scrape the sides. You really want to get it all incorporated so it looks like a batter. This looks pretty delicious. I'm just gonna scrape down, I'm just gonna knock this off. And then set up my stove so that way we can get cooking on these bad boys. All right. We are now just gonna chop up a little bit of cilantro for our garnish on the top of this. I just like to kind of rake my knife over some of the cilantro leaves. I've washed the cilantro. All right, that looks good for my garnish, about enough. So I'm gonna pick off the leaves off the stem. Discard the stems later, or on the side of the board. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're gonna chop it up anyway. It's not gonna be it's just gonna be a rough chop. It smells so fragrant. Some people don't like cilantro. There's actually, some people think that cilantro tastes like soap. That's actually a genetic thing, which I find to be really interesting. I fortunately do not think that it tastes like soap, but if you don't like cilantro or you think it tastes like soap, then don't add this part. That's no biggie. It's not necessary. That leaf didn't look that great. I just quickly rinsed this, kind of rubbed it a little bit together, and then dried it in some paper towels. I rolled it all into some paper towels to make it dry. It's not too wet. All right, this looks pretty good. I'm just gonna pile it in a little pile. And again, I'm just gonna hold my knife at the base so I have a lot of control. Put the tip on my board. And then I'm just gonna place, again, my hand down here, just like we did when we were kind of rough chopping the jalapeno and the scallions. or green onions. Just kind of move it around. I always like my fingers to be out of the way of the blade because the last thing I want to do is cut myself. So you don't have to worry about cutting yourself. A dull knife is when it can slip and then cut you. Okay, that looks really good. So I'm just gonna swipe that into a little bowl so that way, again, mise en place, right? I have everything in its place. So when my arepas are finished frying, I will be able to quickly build a nice little plate for them. All right, see you then. All right, we are over at my stove now, getting ready to fry these arepas. So I'm gonna use one of these types of measuring utensils. It has the tablespoons and ounces on the inside. And also it shows that like 4 tablespoons equals 1/4 of a cup, or it also has it in milliliters. It's really handy. I'm only gonna put in a tablespoon right now of oil because I don't want to overdo the oil, and and I'm gonna probably be frying more and more and more of these. So I'm gonna coat my pan, turn this on, and now I'm gonna turn on my stove. Trying to let it heat up a little bit, and then I'm gonna swirl all of the oil around. See how it just, once it gets hot, it moves a lot faster and it's easier to coat. You could do this with a cast iron skillet or a cast iron griddle. That would be great. It would give a nice little char. You could even do it on a non-stick skillet. And maybe if you did it on a non-stick skillet, you might be able to just get away with just using some Pam. And then, because oil does have calories. So it just calls for heaping a tablespoon. I think that looks about like a heaping tablespoon of the batter. So we're gonna put this in. I'm gonna also kind of flatten it a little bit. Maybe not. You can kind of hear it starting to sizzle. You don't want to put too many in there. It calls for it to be about 3.5 inches in diameter. That's about the size of my finger. But you don't want to overcrowd your pan either, because then it drops the temperature of the pan and you're not going to get a nice crust on your arepa. I'm doing this nice and slowly. I'm in no rush. I'll probably put another one over here. The serving size of this is 3. So if you just wanted to do this, that would be fine. A good way, let's say you live alone, or you're only cooking for yourself, you're the only one that likes arepas, and you want to make this, but you're like, I don't want to eat all of these, right, at one time. So cook them all. And then, once they're cooled down, pop them in the freezer. You're going to let those kind of sizzle. You're going to want them to sit undisturbed for a good amount of time, so you can get a nice, good crust on it. Then, with your spatula, kind of like a pancake. Oh yeah, that's ready. Fully ready to come up. And I'm going to flip it. Oh, no, dang it. Oh my gosh, that looks amazing though. If I could just get this bad boy up. If my pan was, look at that. That looks so good. Hopefully that'll help solidify it. My bowl wasn't in my way. I'm going to turn my heat down. Wow, that looks great. Then I'm gonna, there we go. Put another one in there. I feel like this technique is very similar to making like a pancake, with the cooking technique. Well, I'm going to flip this over and show you. It looks like it's ready. And then you just put it on a container, like a plate, a cutting board with a paper towel to let it drain a little bit. I think I'm actually going to turn the heat down even more. So I want to make sure that I get the insides all cooked. Wow, that looks great. See, and it's important to have everything ready to go when you start cooking because, you know, this happens fast. This goes very fast. I might get a little bit more in there. You know, things like this don't have to be precise. But you do want to get it to be about the right amount of size that they're calling for, because it is like your potassium and your phosphorus are all based on that serving size. It says that it makes 12. So I guess a good way of looking at it is if you've made 12, then each one is approximately 12 total arepas. But let's see what this one looks like. Yep, nice and good. You can kind of tell when they're ready to flip if they start sliding around. That's a good sign. Sometimes you might want an angle to help you flip it and stick it. Like, you know, you want to stick that landing up. See, that's not ready yet. And I might need to turn up my heat just to get it to kind of give that sear. I'm going to add a little bit more oil. This is a very unconventional way of doing it because there's food in this pan. But I'm hoping that it'll kind of release. One of those little tricks of the trade. Kind of roll it around again like we did before. Yep, there we go. See, look, perfect. Flip, flip, Well, this couldn't be any easier, and I've never made arepas before. You guys have seen my very first attempt at this, so that's pretty awesome. I want that little burnt guy. So this is a fairly simple, easy to do recipe. It's all about gathering your ingredients to make everything as easy as possible before doing it. And they are finished. So I'm really excited. I've never made these before. These look amazing. They made 12, perfect. Just like the recipe said, a serving size is 3, and they're supposed to be about the 3.5 inches or like the length of my finger. So perfect. I am so excited about these. Never made arepas before. So you can garnish it with a little bit of sour cream. I like to use 2 spoons just to make it easy to dip off. Oh, the smell is out of this world. You could even like kind of smear the sour cream on, or you could use creme fraiche, or even there's a Salvadorian crema, which is out of this world delicious. I like scallions or green onions, so I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of those on, and then a little bit of that chopped cilantro if you like cilantro. You could also do this like, you know, from above on all of them. That looks really pretty too, doesn't it? And, you know, just kind of, and then people could dip. Ooh, I can't wait. I'm really excited. Ah. They are crunchy and sweet. With a little bit of that jalapeno. These are so good. They honestly are really easy to make. You can do it with frozen corn if you drain that corn really well. Remember, it's about 2 cups of frozen corn. Your kids can help you with this. But they can mix and get their hands in there and kind of mix it all up. That would be fun. A fun little home project. It's always important to get the kids in the kitchen. This is delicious. I hope you enjoyed today's cooking segment on arepas. Be sure to check out our Kidney Kitchen website for more delicious recipes and nutrition information for kidney disease. And remember, be sure to read your labels and share these delicious recipes. Bon appetit.